You've been to North Korea, right?
Yeah.
What do you think Kim Jong-un's reality is?
He thinks his government is going to get invaded and destroyed. They don't care how many people they lose in order to protect their regime.
Do they understand that they're in a dictatorship?
No. If you're growing up in a dictatorship, it's everything that you know. They don't know what's going on outside.
Ignorance is bliss on a country level.
On a country level.
Wow. Do you think North Koreans know about BTS?
If they do, they better keep quiet about it, because if you're watching South Korean stuff, it's a death penalty.
What's the current status with the dictatorship in Syria?
So it is an absolutely murderous dictatorship. To this day, the press wants to tell you the civil war is over. It's going to erupt at any time again.
Mao's been one of the most brutal dictators in human history.
Yes, Mao Zedong was an equal opportunity slaughterer, and he destroyed most of the linkages that China had with its past. So, there are multi-generational consequences to what has happened out there. If you look at an image of Hirohito, you'll see what a sweet old man. Oh no, this guy was every bit as psychotic as Hitler. There was no attempt made at truly colonizing China till the 1930s by the Japanese. That was nasty. Killing, slaughter of the Chinese by the Japanese army. It was serious sadistic crap. Hirohito knew exactly what was happening, and in many cases actually complained, saying, "You're not killing enough Chinese people, kill more of them."
I've always believed that social studies, especially when it comes to the Indian education system, are not taught in as entertaining a way as they can be taught. If Abhijit Iyer-Mitra is making his appearance on any podcast, it's going to be very direct, very brutal, and very uncensored. This is part 2 of our special on dictators. It's our attempt to take history to the Gen Z audiences, to explain the last 100 years of the human story to audiences that want to be told this story in an entertaining manner. Yes, it's brutal. Yes, it's gruesome. But this episode features someone who's a genuine lover of history, but also someone who's actually been to war-torn nations, who's traveled to North Korea, who's traveled to Syria, who's traveled to Afghanistan. Very, very enriching conversation. If you can reach the end of it, I'm sure you're going to enjoy this one with Abhijit Iyer-Mitra on TRS. Back with AIM. I think it's the need of the hour, especially for our country, to really deep dive into world history. We keep talking about India becoming a superpower. This is the general narrative in mainstream media.
Yeah.
I think that this is a part of becoming a superpower in the long term. Having global perspective. Love Indian history, love Indian culture, but it's important to look at what happened outside of India as well. Especially if you intend on traveling all over the world.
Yes.
Your knowledge about Indian history is not going to win you years abroad, but your knowledge and ability to speak about chapters of world history will. That's how you connect with people all over the globe.
Yep.
I kind of look at the knowledge levels that one has about global history and global affairs as a skill set.
It is. And you know why it's so important? Take America. America, you go to any country on earth, the best real estate in that capital would have been bought by the Americans 150, 200 years back. In Paris, the American embassy is right next to the Élysée Palace where the president lives. It's the same size as the president's palace, walking distance literally on the other side of the road. You go to England, prime land, originally in Mayfair near Grosvenor Park, and now they've got something by the riverside. And the best country house in Britain, the one for diplomatic showing off, belongs to the American ambassador. In Bangkok, the best diplomatic property is the American diplomatic property. In India, the best diplomatic property, and on Amrita Shergill Marg, they own about, which is, like the Malabar Hills of Delhi, they own about 10, 12 properties for all their chiefs of department and things like that. they had that global vision from the get-go. From 1776, when they got their independence, they were planning 150 years in the future to become a great power. They would go study everybody's history. You don't get that from American TV, which is so self-obsessed and self-referential. But there's a core bunch of wonks sitting in DC and government which were always thinking in terms of big, bigger, biggest, global. In India, we've never had that, right? First thing you need to do is universities, but Indians don't travel. They want to go to Europe to be seen. You have to have that photo by Mount Matterhorn in Switzerland. You need to be filmed outside the Colosseum. But what did you actually learn of Rome and how Rome became a great power when you went to Rome, right? American students go, French students, British students, they go all over the world and they learn and bring back stuff. We don't. We have never had that global perspective. And there's a counter argument, which is that India is a very different country that way. Other countries have had horrible dictators. What was the last horrible dictator we had? Sui generis to come out of India. We're the only third world country which never went down the path of dictatorship. And even there, when the emergency is the closest we come to a dictatorship, 75 to 77, what Indira Gandhi declared, she was too much of a Democrat and she herself dissolved the emergency and called for elections, right? So she wasn't even a very good dictator at that. So, even our dictators tend to be too democratic for their own. I don't know if it's for their own good or their own bad, but whatever.
Do you think it's because we're a very emotional country, and on some level, just as Indians, we value human life too much and human relationships too much?
Do we? I think we don't value human life enough. Let me give you a simple example. We don't. Our killing isn't through acts of commission like Stalin or Pol Pot or Mao. It's through acts of omission. So, for example, to this day, every year, 200,000 people die of tuberculosis. Have we ever tried to get rid of that? We have hundreds of thousands of deaths every year on the roads because of bad driving, bad signaling, whatever. Have you ever tried to fix our RTOs that give out licenses based on pure corruption? Pure corruption? No. The point I made earlier that the Mao Zedong killed 7 times the number of Chinese that the Japanese Imperial Army did. By omission, I think the Indian government would have ended up killing, post-independence Indian government would have ended up killing, by not doing anything, more Indians than the Brits would have done over a similar 70-year period.
Wow.
I mean, imagine 200,000 people dying per year in road accidents plus TB. 400,000 people a year dying simply because of government inaction. That's like famine level, no? Bengal famine killed 3 million people? I know. Yeah.
Let's re-enter the topic, keeping this India-China comparison in mind. There's been a shift within the span of the last 5-6 years. I remember the podcast that villainized China would actually get a lot of views back in the day. And over time, I think there's a more positive relationship that India has with China. And of course, there's a reflection of, how the geopolitical relations are supposedly healing between the two countries. I think it's very important to study the timeline of China, dialing back to 1947. Roughly then, that's when they'd got...
Roughly, yeah.
Post-World War II.
Yeah.
Would you say that India and China were neck and neck?
India was actually in some ways ahead of China.
In 1947?
In 1947. Remember, they'd been destroyed by the Japanese. And then they'd been destroyed by the Chinese Civil War itself between the Communist Party and the nationalist types. And then Mao Zedong himself did so much to destroy China even more. Like we discussed, 7 times the number of people killed by Mao than the Japanese. In fact, till 1980, India was consistently ahead of China. But from 1980 onwards, they've just skyrocketed. And how?
It was Mao Zedong's successor?
Deng Xiaoping. Successor,
in this phase?
Not his chosen successor. He never wanted Deng Xiaoping to succeed him in that sense. He chose a particularly nasty group. They were called the Gang of Four. They lasted for about a year and a half, and then Deng Xiaoping just took over because nobody else in the party wanted another lunatic like Mao again.
like definitely Mao's been one of the most brutal dictators
Yes.
in human history.
Yes.
Was there some kind of a base he created for China's future or no? I'm just trying to explore that thought right now.
Yes, he did. And I'll tell you how. All old civilizations, especially super old civilizations like India and China, which are like, you can literally trace cultural continuity for 5,000 years. They tend to have huge amounts of historical baggage. Caste, the treatment of women, class, regionality, etc., etc. What Mao Zedong did was that he was an equal opportunity slaughterer, and he destroyed most of the linkages that China had with its past. He destroyed the male female dynamic, the landlord peasant dynamic. All of it was, China was so completely destroyed by Mao. The social fabric was destroyed.
Sorry, let's rewind a little bit. Let's go into World War II, World War One, China in the 1800s. Just we can give some quick context in order to build up Mao's origin story.
So 1700s is when industrialization really takes off in Europe. Till then, you can say China is more or less equivalent to Europe. Big empire, the Qing Empire, huge. It was the biggest country at that point of time on earth, because it included Mongolia and large parts of Russia as well. What is today Siberia, large parts of it were actually part of China. And what ended up happening was the East went on becoming more and more ossified, whereas Europe went on progressive. And the balance of power became so huge that China ultimately by the 1800s was no match for the European powers, right? Now, unlike India, which they could colonize completely, China was too big, too complex for them to go and colonize completely. The other thing that ended up happening was that with China, you had this sort of a very similar thing. In 1857, we had our great revolt or whatever, but there was no one central authority. The emperor was restricted to Delhi. Like, he didn't even control the whole of Delhi. He controlled hardly the Red Fort. So what, 10-acre part of Delhi. The Chinese emperor still controlled a lot. Now, it'll take hours for me to explain why they didn't completely colonize China, but they started taking lots of territories along the periphery of China, right? And that was absolutely crucial. Do you know Indians played a huge role in that? The Opium Wars that were foisted on China were actually done by the Tatars and the Sassoons. The Tatars and the Sassoons, the Sassoon docs here, the big Jewish family, Baghdadi Jews. They were the original Pablo Escobars of the world.
Really?
Yeah. They claimed that their business started off sending Indian opium to China and addicting China. They were literally the original Medellin drug cartel and the Kali drug cartel. And what ended up happening was, they claimed they were British citizens. How dare China ban opium? Britain must go invade. So Britain did a lot of the bombardment and invasions of China to sell Indian drugs produced by Indian companies profiting Indians.
What was in it for the British?
Well, British Tatas and Sassoons pay taxes.
Okay.
So business, they were very commercial that way. They were very open-minded in terms of that commercial aspect of it. China falls so far behind that they're literally a lame duck. And misgovernance, dynasties, the problem with dynasties is maybe the first 2-3 rulers are good, but after that it's all slow decline of quality. And that happens very severely towards the end of the 1800s. By the early 1900s, there's a national resurgence in China. Civil war, almost unending civil war between one faction or the other. They depose the emperor. That's the end of imperial China. There's different kinds of nationalist government. The communists start making an entry in the 1910s, 20s, 30s. But they do something very smart. First is that they get support from the USSR after 1917. So the USSR then starts providing training, weapons, background, hinterland, what Pakistan does to India essentially in terms of Hizbul Mujahideen was what Russia was kind of, not an exact analogy. The second thing that happens is the communists were very smart in China. They allowed the nationalists, the government that now rules Taiwan, to fight the Japanese. And so the Japanese and the nationalist Chinese destroyed each other. Huge power vacuum, the communists take over and claim that they were the ones who fought. The communists never fought the Japanese in China. They claim they fought the Japanese, they never did. They hid out and they allowed the nationalists to destroy themselves fighting the Japanese, and then they just took over the country. It's that simple.
This is World War One.
This ends up being World War II. World War One was quite brutal with China, but it was still a period of civil war and occupation of the periphery. There was no attempt made at truly colonizing China till the 1930s by the Japanese. That was nasty. There were things like the rape of Nanjing, which was a systematic killing, slaughter of the Chinese by the Japanese army. You would have pregnant women getting bayoneted, being slit open from the vagina by Japanese swords, samurai swords, and things like that. There would be killing competitions between Japanese soldiers because the true master of the blade was seen as somebody who beheaded a Chinese peasant with a little bit of skin. You behead him from the back, but there should be a little bit of skin where the head remains attached to the throat. They used to do all these kinds of things. They had horrible chemical warfare units and experimentation where they take Chinese and freeze their legs off so that gangrene would set in and then smash it to see how the body reacts and things like that. It was serious sadistic crap, right?
Pre-World War II.
This is just pre-World War II. It's ultimately the events that 36, 37, 38, around that period. And mind you, the communists did nothing. They claim all the credit. They did absolutely nothing. It was Chiang Kai-shek, the Kuomintang, what we call the nationalists, what is today Taiwan's government, that were doing all the fighting against the Japanese.
Why are you saying it's Taiwan's government today?
Because what happened was the nationalists, they were so exhausted after World War II, the communists started taking everything over. They ran away to Taiwan. Taiwan was the only part of China that they could defend. So they continued to remain out there and built it up as a fortress. So, it's an island. Islands are very difficult to take. And the Chinese couldn't take it. They still can't.
You want to talk a little bit about the of Nanjing?
Yeah, sure.
Context.
So the context was that, the Japanese got into these very European ideas of racial superiority. That, Chinese are the inferior people, the Japanese are the superior master race, exactly like Hitler and Germans are the superior race, the Slavs are inferior, they're meant to be cattle, and Jews, of course, are to be killed. They are not even human beings worth keeping alive. And the Japanese had all these ideas with regards to China. And, the sheer irony of all of this is that Japanese culture was completely influenced by Chinese. Even today, there are 3 scripts in Japanese, the hiragana, the katakana, and the kanji. The kanji is all Japanese. Things. There is so much of the imperial formalized Japanese vocabulary that's directly from Chinese.
You're saying kanji is Chinese?
Chinese characters used in Japanese. I mean, they're modified, but yeah. But they create, you can create these stories of superiority. So for them, they were superior. They were the master race. The Koreans and the Chinese were slave races to be ruled over. And it is in this context that they invade China. And the more the resistance against the Japanese army, the more they would take it out on the local population, going around massacring people left, right, and center. And by the way, that was kind of the norm. The people don't talk about this because, the Europeans want you to believe that they were much more civilized by the 1930s, that they weren't doing these massacres. Absolute rubbish. You look at what the Italians were doing in Libya. It was in fact the British who started concentration camps in South Africa during the Boer War in the late 1800s. Right? Take entire populations, hold them together, don't allow them to go do guerrilla warfare, and let them die by slow starvation, disease, and things like that. The Italians did it in Libya, and then people don't talk about this, but one of the biggest massacres was the Herero massacre by the Germans. Namibia, which is just north of South Africa, was a German colony. The entire Herero people were almost wiped out by the Germans. The Kaiser told his people, behave like Huns. They behaved like Huns, and that is where this entire First World War term, where the French and the British used to call the Germans Huns came about from. There was what King Leopold of Belgium did in Congo, where 1 to 2 million people were just killed. Their hands used to be chopped off if they went meeting the rubber quota and things like that. These were horrible, horrible things that happened, but it was a sign of the times. Till 1920s, through the 1920s, in fact, when chemical weapons had stopped, this was after the First World War, Britain was using chemical weapons on Iraqis. Indian troops, in fact, were dropping those chemical weapons. Indian troops in the British Army.
What kind of chemical weapons?
Mustard gas, all these stuff which will just burn your eyes, burn your face, kills everybody, thousands at one shot. And Churchill was in fact a very avid enthusiast of using chemical weapons on brown native savages. So Iraq was one of those particular things where chemical weapons were used very liberally by the British. I think the difference comes about because even by the 30s, those European standards had kind of, let's say, they went as brutal because their own self-image was that we are Mother Teresa, or, well, whoever the equivalent was in those days. I know, Nightingale, Florence Nightingale. I'm Florence Nightingale. The European can't do this stuff, whereas the Japanese were like, hey, we're just starting out, bro. They started about 150 years late, so they had a lot of catching up to do. But they were behaving exactly as the Europeans did in the previous century, right? So it was the done thing in those days. And then, of course, the Germans got into the game and took it to a whole new level. Because that was the true introduction of industrialization to the genocide process. So the Germans become kind of the masters of it, but the Japanese are kind of competing with the Germans in how many people you can kill very systematically, how many nasty experiments you can do on human beings in camps. And it's always the sort of inferior races chosen for that kind of experimentation and massacre. Because most of the documents that would have directly implicated Hirohito were destroyed.
Why?
Because the Americans wanted to whitewash Hirohito to become an anti-communist bulwark against the USSR. So they were tasked. Initially, they had every intent of trying and executing Hirohito for war crimes. But MacArthur, who led the American occupation of Japan after World War II, after the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, decided very, very quickly that we need the emperor to stay in place so that Japan can become an industrial power again, become an ally, and be anti-USSR. And so all of the documents which would have probably shown that Hirohito was as crazy, if not crazier, I shouldn't use the word crazy, as psychotic, if not psychoticer than Hitler, were all destroyed. And it was the cabinet, General Tojo and people like that, who knew it was their job to die for the emperor and take the blame onto themselves. So every person charged at the Tokyo War Crimes trial refused to name the emperor or attribute blame to him, and they said, we did it. But there's enough circumstantial evidence to show that Hirohito knew exactly what was happening, and in many cases actually complained, saying, you're not killing enough Chinese people, kill more of them. Oh yeah. I mean, you'd think if you look at an image of Hirohito from those days, you'll see what a sweet old man. It's like that sweet old Japanese man in the Tokyo metro who's offering out little bars of mochi or, I know, chocolates or whatever. Oh no, this guy was all in, huh? He was every bit as psychotic as Hitler. The thing is, we don't have proof.
You know, if you meet a Korean person today and you warm up to them, eventually, this has been my experience, especially with the slightly older Koreans, they're pretty anti-Japan even today. There is like a bit of a cold energy between the two.
Yes, and again, the Japanese also did a lot of good in Korea. They industrialized Korea. Korea had not industrialized by itself. The royal dynasty of Korea had failed miserably. The Japanese came and invaded because they sort of industrialized quicker than the Koreans did. So they immediately, their first target was Korea, conquered Korea, horrible atrocities, nasty, nasty stuff.
This is also pre-World War II.
Pre-World War II. This is in the late 1800s. So 1890s to the early 1900s. 1880s, 1890s, early 1900s, conquer Korea, industrialize it forcibly, kill a lot of people, try to Japanicize them. Korean is the inferior language, Japanese is the superior language, everybody should learn. But they set up industries wherever they go. Unlike Britain, which never set up industry in India, Japan set up industry in Korea. Japan insisted that all Koreans would go to school and study Japanese and things like that. They educated the Koreans. The Koreans get very upset when you tell them this, you see, that had it not been for the Japan, you can't really call it human investment. It was really to exploit the Koreans as modern day slave labor. It was nasty. They killed a lot of them as well. But they laid the roots for Korean industrialization.
And we're talking about both North and South here.
Yes, both North and South. Both North and South. And people don't realize this, but North Korea was a success story again till 1979.
Yeah.
South Korea was the great failure. The North was the great success, right? But the roots were laid by Japanese imperialism.
Let's deep dive into the Korean aspect of things. But let's also first complete the Chinese story. Because we began then, we were leading up to Mao.
Leading up to Mao. Now, Mao comes in. Why? Because the Japanese have been defeated. He's got the backing of Stalin. The nationalists have been destroyed because they fought heart and soul to protect China. They lost their entire army fighting Japan. They're completely exhausted. They get crushed in a year's time. Imagine China is such a huge country, 9 million plus square kilometers, almost 10 million square kilometers, wiped out within the space of a year. It also helped, of course, that Stalin was holding Chiang Kai-shek, who was the nationalist leader, his son hostage in Siberia. And Chiang Kai-shek was so obsessed with his son's well-being, he had many opportunities to destroy the communists. He didn't because his son was being held hostage. So it was literally, for want of the son, the kingdom was lost. That kind of a story. He accepts the loss of the whole of China, dies a broken man in Taiwan. Mao comes. Now, again, there are lots of competing leaders within the party. But Mao is the most psychotic and most brutal of the lot. He knows he copies a lot of Stalin's tactics. Anytime anyone comes up to challenge him, he concocts some kind of spy story or whatever and has them killed. Exact Stalin playbook. And that was it. And he controlled it. But his break from China's past, because society is destroyed. When you 70 million, and in those days, 70 million people dying in all these famines that he induces. The Chinese population at that time is 500 million, bro. It's like, 15-20% of your population getting killed off like that. No society can survive that kind of decimation. Social structures break down, and that in a sense makes it a lot easier for his successor Deng Xiaoping to start industrializing China. Good, bad, evil, I don't know. So in many ways you can say that even though Deng Xiaoping built modern China, had Mao Zedong not destroyed ancient China, maybe Deng Xiaoping couldn't have built modern China. Maybe.
Mao probably created hard times that led to the creation of hard human beings.
Exactly.
And those hard human beings work towards building softer times.
But the problem, because we started this off with your observation on how Indians have started becoming more positive about China. Trust an Indian to pick an obsolete idea past its use-by date. When we got into our glorification of the USSR and our great love for the USSR, most of Stalin's crimes and the destruction he had wreaked on his own country were already known. And in spite of that, India and Nehru chose to idealize the communist model and go after Soviet-style big planning and things like that. And we ended up destroying our own country because of it. Well, didn't destroy it, but we never grew. We choose to start admiring China especially when the China growth story is going south, because it all started growing south in 2008 when there was the global economic meltdown. The Chinese government got addicted to reckless spending. Now, Deng Xiaoping had a very clear vision. The Soviet Union didn't understand money, they didn't understand revenue profit, which is why they economically destroyed their own country. He was very clear China would not do it. But when the economic meltdown happens, what do you do in an economic meltdown? You do stimulus spending.
What does that mean?
When business is going bad, the government starts spending massive amounts of money so that you infuse cash. People get new loans and things like that. There is more money for people to spend, and so demand rises automatically and the economy recovers.
But where's that money coming from?
You print it. It's loans against the future and things like that. And they do that, they get addicted to it. And then they go down reckless spending to the point today. Indians get so amazed by the high-speed rail network of China. They're like, look, India has nothing. Look at China's high-speed rail. I mean, I've been on those trains from Xi'an to Beijing. There's speeds of 360, 390 kilometers per hour and things like that. You couldn't even imagine that in India, right? But that entire system is bankrupt. It's $1 trillion in debt. $1 trillion in debt. Their real estate market is a complete disaster. It's about $3 trillion in debt. We don't know the extent of bad loans and failed businesses because it's all hidden. And it is at this time where China is making its biggest economic mistakes that Indians have decided China is something worth emulating. Go figure.
But is it not going to become the world's largest GDP?
It is, but it's going to be a fake GDP, unlike, say, the American GDP. The American GDP, you can tell, it's based on very unhealthy borrowing. We don't know how it will correct itself, but it will correct itself. See, when you are an open country, when you're able to diagnose your problems and discuss your problems openly, you can fix your problems. In China, nobody wants to discuss their problems. They don't want to discuss how much of their economy is in doldrums and beyond bankruptcy. When you don't want to discuss your problems, you want to pretend that you don't have cancer. And it's just, imagine you've got a huge tumor in your stomach and you go around telling people, oh, I'm pregnant. That's not going to work. But trust Indians to choose the worst role models.
How do Chinese people look back at Mao?
Very mixed. Deng Xiaoping's formula was that, and Deng Xiaoping was somebody who was tortured by Mao. His son was thrown from the second floor roof. Deng Xiaoping himself was thrown in jail and tortured by Mao Zedong. And his formula when he became the supreme leader of China was that Mao Zedong was 60% right, 40% wrong, or something like that, or 70-30, something like that. And this is like what we discussed about Stalin as well. The modern Russian thing is great man who did a lot of very nasty things. Same with Mao Zedong. He laid the foundations for modern China, mostly did right, did some things that were very horribly wrong.
Good point to switch into talking about North Korea.
Yeah.
Or the Korean story.
My favorite country on earth.
Let's begin with 2025 context. You've been to North Korea, right?
Yeah.
I think we've discussed it on the show.
We have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's recap that a little bit.
Okay.
How's life in North Korea? 1. 2, do they understand that they're in a dictatorship?
No, they don't understand they're in a dictatorship. Look, does a pig understand it's living in the gutter? If you send a pig off on a holiday to Maldives and put it up at the St. Regis Hotel and feed it champagne every day and caviar every day, maybe it'll understand the difference between the Maldives St. Regis and the public drain in Delhi. But if you're growing up in a dictatorship, it's everything that you know. You have no terms of reference to anything outside. So North Korea, they don't know what's going on outside. Some of them might know who have a kind of inkling about, they may work in the government publicity department, some of the few people that have access to the internet or whatever, who see what's going on outside. But even there in the southern part of North Korea, they're very xenophobic. They see a foreigner, they hide under the desk, they don't want to talk to you. Because that's where the tension is the highest with South Korea. In the northern border, what's amazing is so many thousands of North Koreans work in China. They're given permits to work in China. They're so open they come because they've never seen fat people before. So they all wanted to lift me up and see. It was a strength test for them. This fat brown Indian, we want to lift him up. I want to show how strong I am. And they were all taking selfies on their, well, not selfies, but they were getting their friends to take pictures of them lifting me up. And I had to spend 1 hour being lifted by different North Koreans who were just coming up and trying to have a chat with us. They don't speak a word of English, so you can't even communicate like you could in some other places. Like, in Egypt or something, they'll at least speak a few words of English or something like that, right? In South Korea, they actually, quite a few of them speak English. North Korea, no English. So it's all sign language and we want to lift you up and whatever. Great.
But good vibes towards a brown person?
Very good vibes. Like, I actually felt like a rock star around Mount Baekdu, which is on the China-North Korea border. This beautiful volcanic crater where dear leader was born under, a unicorn gave birth to him under a rainbow and things like that. He was born of immaculate conception, if you don't know. Yeah, he was. Or so they claim. And it's, they have no idea they're living in a dictatorship because they have no reference.
Are there soldiers all around?
Yes. But the very surprising thing is when you listen to this in the Western media, they're like, oh, soldiers, their oppression. No. There, if you're in trouble, you're taught to trust soldiers. So there, if you get into trouble, you immediately go to a soldier and ask for help. And they actually help you. Like, I couldn't climb Mount Baekdu. It's a steep climb, right? And the funicular that takes you up was broken. So I climbed like 300, 400 meters and I was, dude, like another 1.5 kilometers to the summit. I can't do this. So I come down. Now, it's illegal for you to be without a chaperone in North Korea.
As a tourist?
As a tourist. But what do? I walk straight into the army camp at the bottom and they're looking at me going, what the hell? So I'm like, so this guy's like, ha 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 ha. Then he walks up to what I think is his commanding officer and he's like, pss, 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 pss. Looks at me, ha 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 ha. They sit me down, give me some kind of a tea, hot tea. And I thought, damn, I've screwed my chance of going up to Mount Baekdu. No, they got an army truck to take me up. I was like, man, these guys, so, when they say, if you get into trouble, trust the military and go there. I did just that. Now, would they have done this for somebody, a fellow Korean, maybe won't be treated as a VIP or whatever. But for me, they were sweet as pie, bro. So, I got to see Mount Baekdu because of the grace and mercy of the North Korean army arranging a truck to take me up. And on the truck going up, all the North Korean soldiers had never interacted with a foreigner, especially not a brown guy, wearing traditional clothes, because I always wear traditional clothes when I go to these funny countries. And they all wanted to make conversation with me.
But what were the questions like?
I didn't understand because it was there wasn't English. So all I did was I took out my phone and started showing them my photo library, my dogs, my cats, my mom, my house. Like, very nice, very nice, very nice. And they offered me some weird looking snacks on the way up. It's just like, no, thanks. But whatever. But yeah, so, there's joy, I guess, even in, we won't see, I couldn't stay there by the end of 7 days. I was there for 14 days. But by the end of 7 days, I want to get out of there.
Like, I wonder what weekends are like in North Korea.
They go to entertainment parks. They've got these water world, these slides and big pools and things. They've got these big children's palaces. This is in Pyongyang, in the city. In the villages, they have nothing like that. I mean, some of the bigger villages have these scaled down versions of theme parks and water parks and things like that. But other than that, they just go play football or soccer was the only thing I saw. So, yeah.
Was there happiness in the air?
There was happiness everywhere. I didn't see anybody who wasn't really happy per se. Because it's the only life they've known. It's the only life, in coming to Bombay, if I live in my village where I live in a hut. Nobody from the outside world has come. I don't have a car. I walk to my field. I do field work all day. I come back. I don't have electricity, and I listen to somebody doing poetry or a dance drama or something. I'm very happy. But suddenly I come to Bombay and I'm put up near Antila and Mukesh Ambani's house. I feel like a complete piece of shit. If you don't have reference,
Yeah. Ignorance is bliss.
ignorance is bliss.
On a country level.
On a country level.
Wow.
And in the north, where they actually travel, in the north of the north, where they actually travel to China to work, I could actually have some conversations in English. What surprised me was how much willing they were to come and talk to me out of their own accord, as opposed to the southern border where they were actively trying to avoid you. And these guys, from what I could pick up, were like, so I was like, didn't you want to defect, run away to this thing? They're like, why would we run away? We go to China, we earn money. In China, I have a horrible house. Here, I've got my own plot of land. I grow my own food. I've got a very decent life out here. I have to give 50% to the government, which is fine. But then if I don't have anything, the government has to feed me out here. So they're like, actually, in the north of the north, they're very... I wasn't expecting that because, you hear that is where all the defectors swim the river across to China and escape and they get shot and things like that. That isn't what I saw, bro. And in fact, they were all like happy to come up and talk to you about things. And they weren't even scared about the government minder there. I had so many conversations in very, very broken English. Surprisingly, there were people there who could speak English. In a manner of speaking English, enough to make that point.
They perceive China as a land to make money.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, but not a comfortable land. Because you're overworked. The accommodation isn't very good because it's basic labor accommodation. So a guy who would have to share a room with, say, 4 people working in China, when he comes back, he's got his own little cottage with 2-3 rooms. And a farm and a field and a garden outside of it.
What were you seeking when you went to North Korea?
To see how other people live. Because for me, we take so much for granted. You have to see how other people live. Especially in my line of work, which is mostly nuclear and defense, there are so many Indians that have opinions about everything, about places they've never been to. Now, how do you have an opinion about a place you've never been to? You can read, but the reality is always very, like all my travels, Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, North Korea, I find it to be so much more complex and interesting than all the reading I've done put together.
Do you want to talk about the dictatorship angle here?
Sure.
What do you think Kim Jong-un's reality is?
A siege mentality where he thinks his government is going to get invaded and destroyed, which he needs to protect at any cost.
That's actually a part of his...
It is. It's a part of his father's and his grandfather's thing. They're very clear about that. They don't care how many people they lose in order to protect their regime. It's almost a caricature of itself in that sense. I've never seen a more militarized society. Even the orchestras there play military music. Even the pop bands there come out. So we went for this concert by something called the Moranbong Band, which is their official national pop band. There's only one pop band. You can't have different pop bands. There's only the government-sanctioned pop band out there, which frequently gets purged. Apparently, some of them were caught watching porn, which is the death sentence out there, and half of them were killed off shot. Yeah. So I read. I don't know if it's true or not, but some of it is also South Korean propaganda, but anyway.
Do they speak the same Korean that South Korea?
Apparently, it's very different.
Oh, really?
Apparently, it's very different. 70 years of separation. There's been a significant change in vocabulary, not in grammar or anything, but there was one Korean guy, South Korean turned Australian citizen who was traveling with me, and he could speak very easily with them. He's like, he just used to get stuck on words every now and then. And
do you think North Koreans know about BTS? Like, you know what BTS is? It's like the biggest South Korean band. It's like Backstreet Boys, but bigger.
If they do, they better keep quiet about it, because if you're watching South Korean stuff, it's a death penalty.
Okay. That's what I was trying to.
Yeah.
Okay.
The death penalty for a lot of things out there. So better not do that.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Kim Jong-un and his patrilineal lineage.
I mean, I don't even know where to start with those guys, right? Like Kim Il-sung, who was the granddaddy who started it all, was, I guess, the sanest of the lot. I mean, they're all sane, but least kooky of the lot because he industrialized the country completely based on the fact that the Japanese had already heavily industrialized Korea, based on the fact that they had trained and made almost the entire country literate and technically literate. So they could read technical manuals and understand what to do with a machine. Till 79, North Korea was the success. By 1990, when this gentleman dies, North Korea has deindustrialized. They had a choice. Do we become more liberal and continue? Or do we preserve the regime and allow ourselves to deindustrialize? They deindustrialize completely. Then the son, Kim Jong-il, takes over.
But why this choice?
Because every country comes to that point where they have to make a choice. So if you look, South Korea, a lot of these countries, why do they become transition from dictatorship to democracy in the 1980s? Why specifically the 80s? So why does Taiwan become a democracy in the 80s? South Korea, Taiwan, South Korea, Greece, Spain. Why? Because that is when the digital age begins. The industrial age is all about a strong state and centralizing power. The digital and information age is all about a weaker state. The state takes a back seat. So if you actually care about the economic well-being of your people, you take a back seat, and these dictatorships, they've decided, let's become rich. And they go down that path. Then there are countries like North Korea that say, we're not going to reform, we're not going to become rich. It's the preservation of the system that's more important. You in fact see a very different angle to this taking place in China right now. China, for all its achievements, should now be saying it's time for the party to take a back seat so that China can fully enter the information age, and slow democratization maybe, but certainly greater expressions of freedom and things, because we need to move past manufacturing now. We need to move into design and make our money from design, not from the act. Because manufacturing, there's only so much. You are still a blue-collar laborer. But the Chinese have very specifically decided that they're going to remain a manufacturing society, even if it means stuck in a middle-income trap. In those days, that was not available to the Koreans, so they just deindustrialized. This was actually a country that was way ahead, even Israel at that point of time. And they've literally become an agrarian state overnight. And that is when all the famines happened. See, there were some famines which were natural because of drought, but there were some which were actually targeted extermination of entire provinces, like the one in Hamgyong province, which is the breadbasket of North Korea. What Kim Jong-il did was, he said, you know what, you should all make your own, you're free to sell whatever surplus you grow on the market. And they decide to sell it. And then he turns around and says, see, you've all been disloyal to the state. You did not listen to what my father taught you. And so you're all going to starve. And Hamgyong, where about 1 million people died in the famine, was maybe 800,000 people died in the famine, was targeted for punishment. Whole families died and were wiped out because the government withheld food to punish them for being ideologically disloyal. So it is an absolutely murderous dictatorship. To this day, you see the effects. So, when we went to the mausoleum where Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il are preserved in these glass coffins, which you have to go around and bow 4 times. You bow at the feet, then you bow at the left hand, then you bow at the head, and then you bow at the right hand before you go out, where all their gifts and everything are displayed, all the Mercedes and Rolls Royces that they got as gifts from world leaders or whatnot. No Rolls Royces, but mostly Mercedes and things like that, even planes or train carriages that they used. We saw this delegation come past, and I thought it was a delegation of school children. No, it was fully grown people that were 4 feet nothing. You know why? Because when you go through starvation, it stunts you permanently. They were all built really well because after the collective punishment had ended, they were all given soy milk. Now, soy milk leads to estrogenation and things like that, but at least it builds you up because it's protein. Built like bulls, but 4 feet nothing. Midgets. It was literally midgets from Hamgyong province who had come to pay their respects. So, there are multi-generational consequences to what has happened out there. I think that and Turkmenistan are the only real crazy dictatorships I've been to. Like all the other dictatorships I've been to, like Iran and Syria and Egypt, these are all very tame, they're not as dictators go, they're like mom and pop 9/11 stores of dictatorship. The real hardcore stuff is Turkmenistan and North Korea. Fantastic place, dude. The current guy there, who's apparently the illegitimate son of the original dictator out there, he loves accumulating useless Guinness Book of World records. So he has the biggest airport in the shape of a bird. It's shaped like a falcon that's about to take off. The biggest indoor Ferris wheel. The biggest stadium in the shape of a horse. They have the highest number of Guinness World Records for useless things. And everything is about Turkmen Bashi, who's their founder, and now increasingly the new guy. He even does pop videos with his grandson. He sings, and everybody's meant to appreciate his singing and things like that.
Very similar to North Korea?
Very similar. Very similar, but culturally so different because this is very Turkish in nature. That's very Oriental. It's similar and yet different kinds of crazy. But they're not crazy. They're actually very, very smart. They know how to control their populations and prevent them from revolting. And they both have stunning landscapes. So, in Turkmenistan, they have this huge crater that's been on fire for the last 70 years. It was a Soviet gas experiment. That's
hell.
The gates of hell. It's called Darwaza. Darwaza, what we say in Hindi, but they call it Darwaza. And it's fantastic. You drive in the middle of the Kizilkum desert, and there is no more arid desert than that. So when you read about how the Mongol army under Genghis Khan traversed this desert, you're like, dude, it's impossible to do that even now. I wonder how people were doing this. So, a lot of the danger of the Silk Road was actually crossing these two deserts, which are bone dry like you would not believe. And in there's this massive crater that's permanently on fire. It's actually mesmerizing. In Uzbekistan, you get a lot more because Uzbekistan is a much more culturally diverse place. And this is where, you learn so much about Indian history as well, going to these places.
Why?
Because for 1,000 years, we were ruled by Turks who came from these two regions. Not from Uzbekistan. They actually came from Turkmenistan. They were all Turkmens, which is why in Delhi you have the Turkoman gate, but you don't have an Uzbek gate. In India, in fact, in Bengali and in Bihari, the word for idiot is Uzbek. Because the Turkomans were the nomads, the Uzbeks had found the oases like Bukhara and Samarkand to settle down in. And then it starts making sense. The Uzbeks were sedentary, they became very civilized and cultured and things like that. So they didn't go around invading all their neighbors. Whereas the Turkomans always had the peripheral land, so they were much more aggressive. As the Turkomans who migrated and created Turkey, the modern day state of Turkey, created all the Turkic empires in India. The Turkic empires in Afghanistan, Ghurids, Ghaznavids and all these people. And that's when you realize why an Ujbuk is an idiot in Bengali, because it was all the Turkomans coming here and shitting on their
traditional rivals.
Yeah.
I personally feel that the modern day podcast listener consumes podcasts in order to build perspective so that they sound a little more informed in social situations.
Yeah.
Which is why I have to turn the conversation towards relatively modern history, which is Libya, Egypt, Syria. These three. This is around 2010.
Yeah.
Right? In that period.
Yeah.
Would you even club them together? Syria, Egypt, Libya.
No.
Very different.
I mean, even though Libya and Egypt share a border, they're very different, right? Gaddafi came about from a lot of impulses, this Arab nationalism and things like that made Nasser the dictator of Egypt. And then, Nasser's successors continue to rule. It's still a military dictatorship in that sense, right? Libya is more of a tribal dictatorship. I mean, military, sure, but tribal. And Libya is actually three countries combined into one. There's when it was an Italian colony, it used to be called Tripolitana and Cyrenaica. Cyrenaica is where Benghazi is today, which is there's the bay in between. The right side is Cyrenaica, the left side is Tripolitana, Tripoli. And the south is the Berber areas, the Amazigh areas, right? That's the desert. Now, they've never really been united because they've always been a tribal confederacy. Under Gaddafi, it was very rich. The problem, of course, is like Saddam Hussein, the fellow didn't know where to use his oil wealth, used it for all kinds of, terrorism in Egypt, terrorism against Israel, terrorism in his southern border, terrorism in his western border, constantly trying to invade his neighbors one way or another. Ultimately, it all came down. I mean, he tried the Lockerbie bombing. He bombed a American Pan Am airliner, which then led to sanctions. The sanctions were lifted. But then, he was trying to build nuclear stuff. He gave that up as well. He tried suppressing his people again, and then, boom, finished. Killed, tortured and killed by his own people. Brought down by sleight of hand because the resolution was for a ceasefire. The West said, well, you can't have a ceasefire when there's a dictator in power, so they went and bombed him and destroyed his military. And now it's a full raging tribal civil war happening out there, even now. So similar to Iraq, but very different from Iraq. Much, much more tribal. Not as separatist as, say, they have an identity of being Libyan. Unlike, say, Iraqis, where they are Sunni first, Shia first, and Kurdish first. The Kurds, of course, never want to be part of Iraq. The Sunnis want Iraq and to be the oppressors in the system. And the Shias also want a unified Iraq and they want to be the oppressors in the system, right? So it's very different dynamics all over. And that's Libya. I've never found Libya to be a particularly fascinating country because it's low population, very linear sort of explainable circumstances. It didn't even really have a proper whack job of not an interesting dictator, except that he had female bodyguards.
Why? Gimmicky.
He also likes these weird things. He pretended to be a Bedouin living in the desert. So he had palaces and things, but he always used to live in tents that he used to set up outside the palace. Yeah. So.
Why did those revolutions happen at around the same time?
Very good. Demographics. Most of the Arab world had a huge youth bulge and no equivalent economic opportunity for them. They all went through sanctions and international isolation. Now, when you've got a huge youth population, no economic opportunity or limited economic opportunity, you're sitting on a time bomb. Now, Syria was slightly similar but different. So Egypt, Tunisia, it started in Tunisia, in fact, where there was a fruit seller who was killed. His cart was toppled and he was killed. And that's what started off the entire Arab Spring thing. But none of these dictators are really, if there is a caste system of dictators, I would say Mao Zedong, Stalin on top, then Hitler, Mussolini, then the North Koreans and the Turkmens. And the Syrians, Egyptians, and Libyans are like very low, bro. They're like...
Based on what?
Yeah, they're not crazy enough. They're not closed enough. They're much more open to their neighbors and things. A lot of Arab countries, you can just take your car and drive across the border to another Arab country. It's fairly easy. They're not so strict about visas and things like that. So it's nowhere... The isolation is nowhere near Turkmenistan or North Korea in that sense. And remember, the USSR and China were even worse than North Korea or Turkmenistan when they were in the 20s, 30s, 40s and things like that. So Egypt is the most tame of the lot. But Egypt is a very interesting thing because most of global jihad actually starts off from Egypt. These guys called Hassan al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb, who come up with the ideas of modern jihad. And you have this sort of so-called secular military, Nasser in Egypt's case, who cracks down on them very, very hard, makes them, well, Hassan al-Banna died way before Sayyid Qutb. Sayyid Qutb literally died in Nasser's jail while his genitals were being bitten by German shepherds and things like that. Because, dogs have a connotation of dirt and filth in Islam. So it was a way of terrorizing a pious Muslim man, and they would unleash the dogs to bite him in all his places. And he ultimately died in jail from prolonged torture. And a lot of the jihadist philosophies that you see today are because of Sayyid Qutb and what is the Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwan, which spreads. It spreads all over. And progressively, the dictators become less wacky. I mean, look, we've discussed what wacky is, right? They're not really, they're actually quite sane people. It's just that they appear wacky to us because we look at it from a very different perspective. So Nasser dies because he keeps failing to defeat Israel. He dies of shame, essentially. He loses the 67 war, which he initially started off claiming it was a great success. We've destroyed the Israelis. It turns out the bloody Israelis captured the entire Sinai, which is 3 times their own size of their own country. He can't deal with the shame and he dies within a year. He's followed by Sadat, who starts another war with Israel, gets defeated but makes peace with Israel. But he's the first Arab to make peace with Israel. So the same Muslim Brotherhood that Nasser was killing turns on him and kills him because you made peace with the great enemy. And that's followed by Hosni Mubarak, who is, I think he's the only other Air Force general who also became, yes, I think he was an Air Force general. So Syria and Egypt both had Air Force generals as dictators, who's just corrupt, incompetent, and when this Arab Spring happens, he gets overthrown. Why? Because you have a huge youth bulge and not enough jobs. Everything is corrupt. Everything's owned by the military. Generals rule everything. What happens, happens. But then the military gets its revenge. They get rid of them and come back. Syria is the most interesting of the lot. And it's a fast. I love Syria. Syria is traditionally, if you look at the Arab world, when you read all these 1001 Arabian Nights and things like that, it all happens in Damascus, Aleppo, and Baghdad. Why? Because these have always been the 3 centers of power of Arab rule. Aleppo, Damascus, Baghdad in Iraq. Now, Baghdad is part of Iraq now, but Aleppo and Damascus, same country, they have always been rivals for power. Now, what happens in 2011 is there's a huge drought that hits the north. Aleppo is bigger than Damascus. It's richer than Damascus, but it's not the capital. A drought hits the north. Massive migration happens from north to south. So in addition to having a huge youth bulge, without jobs, you're now facing a drought which has destroyed your farming land and what little employment was available out there. So massive internal displacement to the south, which is where the entire Syrian civil war starts. It's destroyed the fabric of that society. It is not a functional society anymore. You think the press wants to tell you the civil war is over. It's not. It's a new phase in the civil war. It is a fractured society. There are too many competing terrorist groups out there of all kinds. It's going to erupt at any time again.
Have you been there?
Yeah, but long back, not recently. I was there in 2006.
You saw it in its glory.
I saw it in its glory. It is such a refined, sophisticated country, very diverse, very beautiful. The sense of history that you feel out there, you feel about 5,000-6,000 years of history out there. You live with it, you see it. Crusader history, pre-Crusader history, from the Egyptian times, from, you can literally see it, feel it. And you see that you can tell these are intensely civilized people.
When you visit Dubai, Abu Dhabi, there's a lot of Syrians there who are. I think they've all migrated to the rest
They've
of the
all,
world.
the ones who can manage have all migrated out there. The higher income types have migrated to Dubai, Abu Dhabi. The low income ones without any future migrated to Europe, and they've destroyed Europe. But the mercantile classes, anybody with money, influence, moved to Dubai, Abu Dhabi. I think they've made Dubai and Abu Dhabi much better for their migration. You know, Syria could have been a lot of things, but the guy there was, the guy who started it all was a chap called Hafiz al-Assad. Murderous, but still very liberal by murderous standards. Like, as serial killers go, he wouldn't have killed 100 people. He may have killed 20, 30 people. Multiply by 1,000, but yeah.
As in, not the most murderous dictator.
Not the most murderous. I found it really bizarre because, you know, the Mukhabarat, which is the secret police, they wear these light pink clothes. You could literally go up to them and have a chat with them. And they were always very interested in you. Oh, you Musafir-e-Hind, you know, a traveler from India. And what are you here for? To learn Arabic and things like that. And you'd have fun conversations with them. It's a much more gentrified middle class society than, say, Egypt is, where there's acute poverty. It's a very lower class society. The norms of Egypt would be complete. And this is where people don't realize the Arab world is so different. The West Bank is very different from Gaza, even though they're all technically Palestinian. The Jordanians are completely different from the Syrians. The Iraqis are completely different from the Jordanians. It's just... And different dictators, different kinds of brutality. Again, there's no template for dictatorship.
What's the current status with the dictatorship in Syria?
Well, you've got a jihadist whack job called Al-Jolani right now, who the Americans want us to believe is some bleeding heart liberal moderate. The worst kind of ISIS fellow you'll get. He was literally beheading women, beheading people for not following the tenets of the Quran and things like that. But we're meant to believe he's now civilized because he's got the same fashion stylist as Zelensky, by the way, who dressed him in the same kind of fatigues, you know, those olive green fatigues and things. Tried to make him look the same war sex doll image, Ken doll of war image kind of thing. And now he wears suits.
Why do I feel like this is a nice point to end the podcast?
I think so too.
It's been the last chapter in dictatorial history. Abhijit Iyer-Mitra, thank you. It was fun.
Thank you. I had fun.
Been wanting to do this episode since the first time I ever met you. So I'm glad we did this.
I'm glad we did it too.
And many more history episodes coming your way. So I think the comment section will lead us to the next few chapters.
That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was the episode for today. Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed this episode, I highly recommend you check out part 1 of this conversation. That one was much more centered around World War II and European dictators. Any history-themed conversation with AIM is always extremely enriching. He's very direct with his opinions. And I think that people like him, Indians like him, need to be much more featured on the global internet. This is an attempt in that direction as well. AIM will be back with another couple of spectacular history episodes. And as for you, the viewer, the audience, please send in your feedback. Tell us how we can improve these history-themed episodes for you. Tell us which are the guests you'd like to see featured. And tell us what are the topics you'd like covered on TRS.